There is a very specific moment when you can sense whether someone is thinking about you. And no, it's not by checking if he viewed your story. It's not by waiting for a text. It's not by looking for signs. It's something far more subtle and much harder to fake. Most people get this wrong because they try to feel the other person while they're drowning in their own anxiety. And when that happens, everything becomes a sign. A dream becomes proof. A silence becomes a message. A coincidence becomes fate. But let me ask you something, honestly. When you think he might be thinking about you, does it feel calm? Or does it feel urgent? Those two sensations can look similar on the surface. Psychologically, they're opposites. Carl Jung spent decades studying what he called synchronicity, moments when two emotionally connected people seem to experience parallel inner states without any obvious logical explanation. But Jung also warned about something far more common: unconscious projection. And here's the part almost no one wants to admit. Most of the time, we're not perceiving the other person. We're projecting our own desire onto them. So before any exercise, before any technique, before anything practical, there's a real question you have to face. Do you want to know whether he's thinking about you? Or do you want confirmation that he is? Because if you can't tell the difference, your mind will manufacture answers. This isn't about sending energy. It isn't about forcing thoughts. It's about something rarer. Learning how to quiet your inner noise enough to actually perceive. And when you learn how to do that, you don't have to pull answers out of the world. They surface on their own. There's something strange that happens when you really care about someone. You start noticing things you didn't before. A name that sounds like his on a street sign makes you pause. A random song comes on and you go quiet without knowing why. You wake up at 3 in the morning and his face is the first thing that crosses your mind. And then comes the question. The same one, almost every time. Is he thinking about me right now? Most people brush that off as wishful thinking. Just imagination. But Jung observed something during decades of clinical work that challenges that easy dismissal. He wasn't a mystical romantic. He was precise, analytical, sometimes almost cold in his reasoning. And yet, he documented case after case of emotionally connected people experiencing parallel inner shifts without any clear causal link. He called it synchronicity, not magic, not fantasy telepathy, something quieter. And maybe because it's quieter, more unsettling, the possibility that when two people carry each other with enough emotional weight, there's a kind of resonance, like two tuning forks in the same room. Strike one, and the other begins to hum. But here's what almost nobody talks about. Most people who try to sense whether someone is thinking about them are doing it from the wrong place. It's not that the idea is absurd. It's that the internal state matters more than the method, and that difference changes everything. When you're anxious, when you need to know, when uncertainty is gnawing at you from the inside, your perception gets distorted. You start interpreting everything as confirmation, an old like, a story view, a dream. You're not perceiving. You're selecting fragments to support what you already want to believe. Jung had a word for that too: projection. It's when something inside you gets placed outside, onto the world, onto another person, and you begin to see externally what actually originated internally. So the honest question becomes, do you really want to perceive him? Or do you want relief from not knowing? Those are not the same thing. Confusing them is the invisible psychological error most people never realize they're making. This isn't about forcing connection. It isn't about manifesting attention. It's about clearing enough internal distortion to see what's actually there, and doing that in a way that's psychologically grounded, not just spiritually appealing. There's a difference, a big one. Jung once shared a story that stayed with me. A patient dreamed that his best friend was drowning. The dream was vivid, disturbing. He woke in the middle of the night, shaken, unsettled for days. Later he learned that at the exact time of the dream, the friend had gone through a severe emotional crisis. Not literal drowning, but something close to it, internally. Jung didn't use this to claim dreams predict events. He used it to illustrate something more subtle. The unconscious mind can register shifts in people we're deeply bonded to before our conscious awareness catches up. Modern psychology has language for this now: implicit cognition. The idea that we process far more than we consciously realize. Subtle changes in tone, behavioral patterns, emotional micro-shifts, signals that get stored below awareness until something brings them forward. So when you wake up with that strange sense that someone feels close, it might not be fantasy. You may have registered something real without knowing how. The difficulty is distinguishing perception from projection. And here's something almost nobody explains. Projection has a different texture than perception. Projection feels urgent, tight, restless. It needs confirmation. It searches for evidence. Real perception feels quieter, more contained, almost complete in itself. It doesn't demand proof. It doesn't spiral. Learning to tell those textures apart, that's the real work. And there's an invisible mistake people make right here. They try to perceive the other person while still completely inside themselves. When you're anxious, where is your attention? On you, your fear, your longing, your need. The other person becomes an object inside your emotional world, not a separate subject with their own inner life. You're not thinking about him, you're thinking about how he relates to you. That distinction is subtle, but it changes everything. In some contexts, Jung referred to this as psychic inflation, when the ego expands so much that there's no space left for the other person to exist as they actually are. To genuinely perceive someone, you have to do something counterintuitive. You have to step slightly outside your own urgency. Not erase what you feel, not pretend you don't care, but create enough inner space for him to exist as himself, not as your wish, not as your fear. From that space, perception becomes possible. Now let's talk about something practical. And I want to be clear about what this is and what it isn't. This isn't a ritual. It isn't manipulation. It's an exercise in attention and honesty. Choose a moment when you're relatively steady, not in the peak of anxiety, not right after a triggering conversation. A neutral space. Morning before checking your phone. A quiet pause in the afternoon. Before bed. Sit somewhere comfortable. No candles required. No perfect silence. Just a few uninterrupted minutes. Close your eyes. Breathe normally. Don't control it. Just notice it. Then, and this is the important shift, don't think about how he feels about you. Think about him as he is, when no one is watching. What is he like in the morning? What genuinely worries him? What relaxes him? What kind of mood does he fall into when he's alone? Be curious about him as a person, not about his feelings for you. Notice what happens. You move from waiting to observing. And from there, simply watch what arises. Don't ask directly, is he thinking about me? Just stay open. Sometimes nothing comes. That's information too. Sometimes an image appears with a certain emotional tone, distance, heaviness, lightness, longing. Those aren't proof. They're data points. Anxiety turns this into self-deception. Presence turns it into perception. At the end, don't analyze. Don't decide whether it was real. Let it sit. Maybe write down a word that surfaced, then leave it alone. The analytical mind, if it barges in too soon, drowns out exactly what you were trying to hear. Jung once suggested that the unconscious speaks softly, and the critical mind is loud enough to overpower it. This works only if you allow perception to exist before verification. There are common mistakes. One is using this to escape uncertainty. Wanting to perceive something real is different from wanting relief from not knowing. Uncertainty is uncomfortable, but it's honest. Another mistake is turning this into a compulsive routine. Doing it constantly because anxiety spikes. Then it becomes control disguised as self-awareness. There's a shadow there, the illusion of depth covering a very human need for certainty. And the most subtle mistake, interpreting silence as rejection. Sometimes nothing comes because your system is overstimulated. Sometimes timing matters. Sometimes perception takes refinement. Absence is not a message. And even when perception is genuine, it doesn't replace real conversation. Intuition doesn't eliminate the need for clarity. It doesn't remove responsibility. It's a way of knowing, not a way of solving. At some point, Jung wrote that the task of adulthood is learning to live with what we cannot control without losing contact with who we are. You cannot control whether he's thinking about you. You can't control timing, feelings, outcomes. The only real territory you have is your own inner clarity. And when you develop that, not as a slogan, but as practice, something shifts. Maybe not outside, but inside, the waiting changes. You stop scanning constantly, stop decoding every silence. Not because you don't care, but because you found ground within yourself that doesn't depend on immediate reassurance. And paradoxically, that's when perception becomes cleanest. Not because you used a trick, but because you created enough silence to hear. Jung once said that no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That's the work. It's simpler and harder than any 33-second technique. But it's the only thing that actually changes anything.